Jamaica, last week we opened the history books to witness the tragedy of the 47-day architect, Sir Donald Sangster, a brilliant technocrat who literally worked himself to death for a newborn nation. Welcome back to part 2 of our 9-part definitive historical countdown, In the Shadow of the Chief. This week, we pivot from the quiet accountant to his successor, the prince who never asked for the crown. When Sangster drew his last breath in a Montreal hospital in April 1967, Jamaica was thrown into an immediate architectural panic. The country was suddenly an empire without an active emperor. The old chief, Sir Alexander Bustamante, was too frail to return to the throne, leaving a massive power vacuum in the smoke-filled back rooms of the Jamaica Labour Party cabinet. The man who would walk out of those rooms as Jamaica's third prime minister was a towering, handsome 43-year-old trade unionist, Hugh Lawson Shearer.
Today is not only the end of the year 1969, it is also the end of the decade of the 1960s. It has been a 10-year period of adventurous and spectacular activity for the whole world, and with sensational achievements matched step by step with remarkable progress for us here in Jamaica. We began the decade with uncertainty. We began in 1960 with Jamaica involved in an experiment of a federal concept of nationhood. There was concern about and efforts to bring all Jamaicans into the stream of progress. The pressure of individual ambitions also saw more energy being generated towards production.
To the public, he was the natural heir, a blood relative, and a direct protege of Bustamante. But behind closed doors, Shearer didn't campaign for the job. He was pushed into the chair, masterfully engineered by an ambitious Harvard-educated political genius who knew exactly how to play his cards. That man, Edward George Philip Seaga. To truly understand how Hugh Shearer became Prime Minister, we have to look past the official press releases of 1967 and look at the cold, calculating chessboard of the JLP cabinet. In 1967, Edward Seaga was the brilliant, intensely ambitious Minister of Development and Welfare, later taking over the finance portfolio.
Those that will move capital and technology across the border to the economic development and betterment and mutual betterment of our people.
He possessed a masterfully strategic mind, but he faced a severe demographic roadblock. Seaga was a light-skinned Jamaican of Lebanese descent, born in Boston, USA. In a newly independent, overwhelmingly black nation, where colonial racial wounds were still raw, bleeding, and deeply felt, Seaga knew that if he ran for Prime Minister directly at that moment, the political elite and the masses alike would react with deep volatility. He could not take the crown himself, at least not yet. So, Seaga became the kingmaker, the leading heavy favorite contender to replace the deceased Sangster was Robert Lightbourne, a highly sophisticated, eloquent and incredibly powerful Minister of Trade and Industry. Lightbourne had immense backing among the Jamaican merchant class and the political establishment. If Lightbourne became Prime Minister, Seaga's own path to absolute power would be blocked for a generation. Seaga needed a shield. He needed a leader who possessed deep, unquestionable grassroots legitimacy among the working class, but one who lacked the predatory, cutthroat political ambition to block him in the future. Enter Hugh Shearer. Shearer was a man born in Martha Brae, Trelawney. He was a product of the working class, a fierce, street-tested negotiator who had risen through the ranks to hold the absolute loyalty of the massive Bustamante Industrial Trade Union, BITU. Crucially, he was also Bustamante's cousin. To the traditional JLP base, Shearer was practically royalty. Behind closed doors, a tense cabinet vote was called to break the deadlock between Lightbourne and Shearer. Seaga and his powerful allies masterfully threw their weight, their delegates, and their backroom influence behind Shearer. Through brilliant political maneuvering, they isolated Lightbourne's faction, engineering a razor-thin victory for Shearer in the private JLP vote. At just 43 years old, Hugh Lawson Shearer was thrust onto the throne, becoming the youngest Prime Minister in the British Commonwealth. But it was a gilded cage. Shearer was caught in an impossible vice. He had to follow the technocrat genius of Sangster and govern under the mythic shadow of Bustamante, all while Edward Seaga tightly controlled the nation's economic purse strings. On paper, Hugh Shearer's tenure was an absolute economic miracle. If you look purely at the macroeconomic statistics of the late 1960s, Jamaica was flying. Shearer presided over the most prosperous economic era in modern Jamaican history, with the island's economy growing at a staggering, unprecedented average rate of 6% per year. Capital poured into the island like never before. Under his watch, 3 massive bauxite alumina refineries were constructed, transforming Jamaica into a global mining titan and the primary supplier of aluminum base to the Western world. Deep foreign and domestic capital poured into Montego Bay, Negril, and Ocho Rios, building the modern infrastructure for global tourism that still stands today. Driven by a desire to uplift the poor, Shearer's government launched an aggressive nationwide school building campaign, constructed dozens of junior secondary schools, and ensured that the working class Jamaican children finally had access to secondary education. Yet, underneath the glittering GDP numbers and the celebratory ribbon cuttings A dangerous sociological cauldron was boiling. The tremendous wealth generated by the bauxite and tourism booms was not trickling down to the masses. Instead, it was pooling heavily in the hands of the traditional brown and white merchant classes, often referred to as the 20 families. In the slums of Western Kingston, corporate area, and rural parishes, unemployment soared. Inflation began to creep in, and inequality widened to a chasm. Young, urban, black Jamaicans began to look at Shearer's government not as liberators, but as a neo-colonial elite wearing Jamaican faces, running a system that enriched foreign capitalists while leaving the local population in poverty. Hugh Shearer was fundamentally a conservative institutionalist. He believed in law, order, and British parliamentary decorum. He was deeply uncomfortable with radical Pan-Africanism and a rising tide of militant black power coming out of the United States and civil rights movements, viewing them as existential threats to the fragile stability of a young tourism-dependent economy. In October 1968, that philosophical clash hit a violent tipping point. Dr. Walter Rodney, a highly charismatic, brilliant Guyanese history lecturer at the University of the West Indies Mona campus, had been doing something the Jamaican establishment found terrifying. He wasn't just staying in the ivory towers of the university. Rodney was walking directly into the Kingston gullies and Rastafarian communities. He was organizing urban youth, preaching a radical doctrine of black power, class consciousness, and systemic revolution. He was telling the poor that independence was a sham if the economic power remained in the hands of the colonial remnants. Panicked that Rodney was laying the groundwork for an armed socialist uprising, Shearer's government made a fatal decision. On October 15, 1968, while Rodney was attending a Black Writers' Conference in Canada, the government declared him persona non grata and officially banned him from re-entering Jamaica. The reaction was instantaneous, furious, and explosive. The moment the news broke, UWI students marched in protest toward George William Gordon House. Within hours, the marginalized, frustrated masses of Kingston joined them. The streets erupted into what history now calls the Rodney riots of 1968. For several terrifying days, Kingston burned, and buses were set ablaze, as well as subways. Commercial buildings were smashed, and millions of dollars in property damage occurred. The illusion of a peaceful, harmonious, multiracial post-independence Jamaica was irrevocably shattered. Shearer responded with an iron fist. He deployed the Jamaica Defense Force, authorized the use of tear gas, banned radical literature from entering the island, and prohibited unauthorized public marches. While he successfully suppressed the physical uprising, the psychological damage to his administration was done. The post-independence honeymoon was officially over. The masses now saw the JLP government as an oppressive force, as they put it. As the political and social ground shifted under Shearer's feet, the soundtrack of the nation shifted with it. The upbeat, energetic, and celebratory horn sections of ska, which had defined the optimism of 1962 independence, abruptly gave way to a slower, heavier, and deeply political sound. Rocksteady and early reggae. The youth were no longer singing about dancing. They were singing about survival. They were singing about the sufferer. Enter figures like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Bunny Wailer, and a host of roots reggae artists were beginning to give a global voice to the very ghettos that Shearer's government was trying to police. Songs like Duppy Conqueror and Systemic Critiques became anthems of resistance to the government. The Shearer administration was terrified of this cultural explosion, frequently using the state radio system to what they call censor, to censor political charged records and monitor Rastafarian communities with deep suspicion. But it was a tidal wave that could not stop. The culture had outpaced the government. By 1972, the social fractures within Jamaica were too wide for Shearer's technocratic and conservative approach to mend. The masses were demanding radical structural change, not just high bauxite statistics. And waiting to capitalize on this immense reservoir of frustration was a master populist, a man born of political dynasty, Michael Manley.
At the root of our policy in the future will be humanism, self-reliance, and economic nationalism to create a society of personal freedom.
He did something brilliant. He allied himself directly with the roots culture, the Rastafarians, and the suffering youth, famously carrying a walking stick said to be given to him by African Haile Selassie, which the public dubbed the Rod of Correction. Manley, weaponizing the inequality of the Shearer era, ran on the slogan, "Socialism is love." In the 1972 general election, the JLP was completely crushed in a historic landslide. Hugh Shearer, the gentlemanly negotiator, the trade unionist who preferred boardrooms to ideological warfare, simply did not possess the ruthless, fiery populism required to survive this new hyper-tribalized political landscape. Recognizing that the political tide had turned permanently against his style of leadership, Shearer stepped down as leader of the JLP in 1974, retreating back to his true passion, labor negotiation and international diplomacy, where he would later serve with immense distinction as a highly respected foreign minister. And waiting right there in the wings, ready to pick up the pieces of the shattered party, and finally seizing the absolute control he had prepared 7 years prior, was the ultimate political chess player, the man who had engineered Shearer's rise from the very beginning, Edward George Philip Seaga. Friends, join me again next week when we will look at the Democratic Socialist and the Cold War. Michael Manley will be next up.
Can know there is somewhere they can sit down and break bread together. Can know there is a room that they can put the children in. And know that at night the children can go and sleep there in peace.
In our ongoing series, In the Shadow of the Chief. Throughout this series, we will uncover the untold historical narratives of all of Jamaica's prime ministers, examining both their crowning achievements and their flaws. Our journey will ultimately culminate with the chief himself, Sir Alexander Bustamante, Jamaica's first prime minister and the foundational architect of the nation. Don't miss next week's episode. Until then, subscribe, like, share, and I'll see you next time.
Jamaica,
Here we come,
one people, one nation,
standing tall,
under God.
strong and free.
Jamaica,
The land we love.